Hi, my name is Karina Barley. I am an education consultant and a behaviour specialist for children who are on the autism spectrum. I create courses and training for educators and other people who are working with these children. And there is a lot of discussion about Bloom's digital taxonomy and what that actually means for children on the spectrum. And I wanted to do this presentation to have a chat about that. So let's move forward. So way back in 1956, Benjamin Bloom, an educational psychologist who was working at the University of Chicago, developed his taxonomy of educational objectives. And what that kind of means in layman's terms is that he had a sequence in the way that children learned, and that it started from a certain point, and as they acquired more information, then their learning became more developed and more concentrated and therefore more mature. So his taxonomy of learning objectives has become a key tool in structuring and understanding the learning process. And in education, we do bandy around Bloom's taxonomy and Gardner's multiple intelligences as well. And we kind of use it as a framework from which we teach. However, I don't know if we are really doing it properly or doing it in the way that Bloom intended. So let's explore a little bit further. So in the cognitive domain, Bloom's taxonomy is essentially a theory that outlines the order in which we learn and integrate that learning into knowledge. So as I said before, at some point we remember, and then we might put that remembering into acquired knowledge. So if someone is really interested in facts and figures, for example, they might remember how to do their times table. And after a period of time of remembering, eventually that becomes an integrated piece of knowledge. So Bloom categorized and ordered his thinking skills and objectives. His taxonomy identifies the thinking process and that you cannot understand a concept if you do not remember it first. Similarly, you cannot apply knowledge and concepts if you do not understand them. This infers that there's a continuum from lower order thinking skills way down here of knowledge and comprehension to higher order thinking skills. These are arranged in increasing order from lower order to higher order. So we have with Bloom's taxonomy the theory that knowledge is acquired first, then we comprehend that knowledge, then we apply it in some way, then we analyze it, synthesize it, and then evaluate it. So later on in the 90s, former students of Bloom, Lauren Anderson and David Krathol, revised and published this Bloom's revised taxonomy in 2001. So the key to this is the use of verbs rather than nouns for each of the categories and the rearrangement of the sequence within the taxonomy. And also they changed the language a little bit so it made a bit more sense to the layman, as it were. So we have remembering under the lower order thinking skill, and that is just simply memorizing of facts, going over times tables, remembering how to spell, remembering the laws of grammar, that kind of thing. So then we come to understanding. So some of those things that they're remembering becomes more automatic. Then they're applying, and this is where they're doing a piece of work and they're applying the things that they've remembered and understood as a concept and showing you how much that they've actually learned. Then they're analysing all of those three things together, the remembering, understanding and applying, when they're thinking about how they're going to create a piece of work. So let's say a student is wanting to do a project on a particular subject matter, they have to put all of those three lower order thinking skills together and analyse, well, what part of the things that I've learned am I going to use to create my project? That then evolves into evaluating, okay, I'm going to take this piece of information, but I may not take this piece of information. I want to demonstrate what I've learned by doing a PowerPoint presentation, or I want to demonstrate what I've learned by creating a poster, or I want to demonstrate what I've learned by doing a 3D model. And that's where the creating comes in. So the creating becomes the doing. So all of these things evolve into each other. And so when they're creating, the learning is then acquired. So the concept has been integrated into their being, as it were. So if we look at this from a digital perspective, because this is what we're really interested in, is this digital taxonomy, we can see how using technology and computers and tablets, we can easily apply Bloom's taxonomy to the digital arena. So in remembering, they are describing and identifying, and it's where they're doing their research and they're finding facts and finding figures and all of that kind of thing, and they're using the internet or they're using a particular app to do that. In understanding, they might be doing more advanced searches. They might be commenting, they might be annotating and thinking about what they're learning using their digital technology. Applying, they might be implementing and carrying out. So they're loading and uploading and playing a game, or they're operating, or they're sharing, or they're editing. Analyzing, this is where they're linking things together. So they might be putting some media with some words, which again is another kind of commentary. Evaluating, they're hypothesizing, they're critiquing, they're experimenting, they're judging. And they might be working collaboratively. They might be commenting on a blog. They might be reviewing somebody else's work. And they might be testing various games or various apps. And up here in creating, it's where the real designing, constructing, planning, inventing, using the technology. So here is where they might be filming, they might be animating, they might be podcasting, broadcasting, videoing, using the apps to create something. You can see how the learning evolves and it becomes this continuum of a process of acquiring knowledge and acquiring concepts. So collaboration is a key element to the acquisition of 21st century skills. And for children on the autism spectrum, this is one of the challenging aspects of their condition, as most have socialization issues. So what does that mean? It means that they do struggle enormously with working in groups and working in teams. And this can be a number of reasons. One, it can be that they like to be in control and they like to control their environment. Two, it can be they simply do not understand what the other students are doing. Three, they don't get other people's ideas. They can become very narrow focused. So when there's a whole lot of ideas coming in, they can get lost because they're only really focused maybe on their own ideas. And four, it just can be uncomfortable for them to have that much going on around them. So group work and collaboration is a real big struggle for kids on the spectrum. Using technology can be extremely helpful for these students, as the technology can become the buffer they need that enables them to communicate. So one of the things that we can do easily is by using the iPad or using a computer, mostly I think the iPad works best, is that they can be collaborating, but they can be working on a team building exercise using a collaboration or a screencasting type app. This is the buffer that they need that enables them to communicate with others. There are a lot of older kids who are on the spectrum, prevalent in social media like blogs and YouTube and Facebook and all of those kinds of social networking forums, because it's there that they can have a voice and they don't have to worry about being in the presence of others. Now, does that mean that we throw out the baby with the bathwater, as it were, and not try to integrate them in a more social, real kind of world situation? Of course not. But we can use the technology as the buffer to get there. So the SAMR model is the substitution, augmentation, modification, redefinition model. Now that is a heck of a mouthful. But this is a method of seeing how technology might impact teaching and learning. It also shows a continuum that educators using technology can follow as they progress through teaching and learning using technology. If you go down to this website here, you can find out more about this model. We don't have time to explore it in too much detail here. Kathy Schrock has a fantastic website which has a multitude of information. She's collated a whole range of websites and profiles and PDFs and research, etc., on a whole range of digital ideas and digital methodologies. I highly recommend her website as a go-to place for anything technology. Now, what she did, however, in this case, is that she combined the two models that reflects the impact of technology on learning. So if we have a look down here, we can see that remembering is really about substitution. So technology acts as a direct tool substitution with no functional change. Then we have understanding and applying, which relates to augmentation. So the technology acts as a direct tool substitute with functional improvement. Some of these overlap a little bit, so applying also refers to modification along with analysis and evaluating. So the technology allows for significant task redesign. So you can sort of see how this is evolving, and by combining them together it makes sense. Then we have evaluating and creating in redefinition. The technology allows for the creation of new tasks previously inconceivable. Oh, and sorry, let me come back to that for a moment. This is where the transformation occurs, and the educator can design a task that has significant impact on student outcomes. So if we think about this while we're creating our curriculum and differentiating it for each student, it helps us to know what kinds of activities we should introduce using our technology. So let's tie all this together. I can't stress enough how important it is to understand that technology does not replace the teacher and good pedagogical practices. It's as simple as that. That's one of the things I hear all the time. Oh yes, but we tried to use the iPad, but it really didn't make any difference. And then when I asked the question of, well, how did you use it? Oh, we used it as a reward after a work session, or we had iPad time. The iPad, or any technology for that matter, is not meant to be a scheduled piece of your curriculum day. If you're going to use technology, it needs to be an integral, seamless part of your curriculum. So instead of going and getting a book and pencil, you're going to get your students to get their iPad instead. If you're scheduling iPad sessions, you are doing it incorrectly. I just can't stress that enough. Secondly, handing the child the iPad, opening it up an app, and getting them just to use that app without your intervention and you overseeing it is missing the mark completely. You wouldn't give a child a worksheet and not come back and assess how they're doing on that worksheet. You wouldn't give them a project and then come in as the teacher and provide some guidelines and oversee and assess and get them to edit and all of those kinds of things that you do in your teaching life. And the principle is the same for technology. You can't just hand the child the iPad with an app open and expect there to be learning occurring. You need to be the driver of that learning. So here again, I'm stressing it. Handing the iPad to a child and expecting them to learn from it is not using the iPad for educational purposes. Using the iPad purposefully with educational outcomes in mind elevates this technology to an educational tool that can be integrated into curriculum. So let's go back to Bloom. Bloom suggested that learning occurs like a pyramid in that you need to go through each step to get to the next. Okay, let's have a think about that. I personally believe this model can also be viewed as a continuum where a child might move back and forth between the steps over time. That just makes sense to me. So let's go back to the model for a minute before we come back to what I've written here. So let's have a look here. Remembering. Now, I don't know about you, but I do remember a lot of things. They're different things depending on what I like and what I don't like. I have this amazing ability to be able to remember songs and movie scenes and quotes from movies and that kind of thing. And that's because I love that stuff. That's the thing I love to do. And you'll find this is the same with your students. Things like mathematical facts and algebra and all that kind of stuff, not so good with the memory. So I go and learn that and remember the facts for when I'm about to use it in any particular given situation. And then I might understand and apply, analyze, evaluate, and even create. But a couple of months later, I go to use that fact again and I've forgotten half of what I've remembered. So I need to come back again and remind myself, okay, that makes sense. And then all of these things drop into place. So what I'm suggesting is that rather than it be a sequence that is set in concrete, so we can use Bloom's taxonomy to move up and down this scale at any given point in time, depending on what we're doing. I hope that makes sense. So let's go back to my statement. So even when knowledge is acquired and demonstrated through creating, oftentimes the student might go back to remembering, understanding, or applying to revisit a concept before using it. This means learning can be a fluid, organic, and evolutionary process. The following pages illustrates Bloom's digital taxonomy and provides suggestions of apps that can be used in the learning arena. This is not a definitive list, and many apps can be used across the continuum of Bloom's taxonomy. So I want to tie it all up together before we move on to that. So if we think about using technology to help us to learn from, and we go back to thinking about Bloom's taxonomy, we just need to apply the same concepts. And I wanted to show you how important that was, and especially for children on the autism spectrum. Most kids on the spectrum have particularly good memories. So remembering isn't such a hard thing for them. It's the applying and the synthesizing and sort of putting it all together that they have trouble with. So sometimes we can be focusing so much on the remembering that we forget to use the other parts of the taxonomy. Let me just give you an example of that. Children who are on the autism spectrum often have what's called dysgraphia. Dysgraphia is where children have problems with handwriting. This is a really well-known problem, and significantly huge amount of kids on the spectrum have this as an issue. And that could be because of some fine motor skills, hand-eye coordination. I've had a lot of conversations with kids and they have problems with the texture of the paper or the shapes that are forming on the paper. It's hard for them to view and hard for them to see. So there's a whole range of reasons why that might be the case. I've been in schools where we have students who are 10, 11, 12, and we are still doing handwriting sheets with them, tracing over the letter A, tracing over the letter B, putting those words together. Can you imagine how soul destroying that is for these kids? Because they already got the remembering. They know what an A is. They know what these words are. They don't want to be continually having to be at the remembering phase. We have to progress these kids and allow them to develop. And if there are some learning issues like dysgraphia, for example, we have to find alternatives, and that's where the technology comes in. We can use the iPad for them to type their answers and demonstrate their learning. Whereas if we're focusing only on the handwriting, we're focusing only on that lower order skill. So if we think about remembering and what we do with that, we're listing, we're relating, we're matching, restarting, recognizing, finding, showing, naming, choosing, and I'm sure you could probably come up with a whole lot of other words. There are so many different apps here that enables students to demonstrate and to integrate the remembering process of learning. I can't go through every single one of them in this activity. I'm going to provide you with the link to this document, and all of these apps are connected. If you can have a look here, you'll see all of these apps are connected to iTunes. So when you open up the document, you can click on the link and go to iTunes and check them out for yourself. And that's part of the process that you should go through anyway. Don't just use an app because somebody told you that it's a good app. You should use it, try it, experiment with it, and think about what you're going to do with that app that will enhance your students' learning. So let's go to understanding. When we're understanding, we are showing, we're reviewing, inferring, outlining, extending, paraphrasing, interpreting, organizing, and discussing. There are a whole range of different apps. Now this is just a select amount. I could easily have had 3, 4, 5 pages for each of these sections, but I wanted to highlight some that I find particularly beneficial. Then we have applying. So when we're applying, we're practicing. solving, generalizing, developing, interviewing, operating, implementing, planning, and choosing. These are the kind of apps where your students will have to think about how they're going to use this app. It's not just like a game or an activity. So for example, in Comic Life, this is like a comic creator, and they can create projects, they can do posters, they can do all sorts of different things using this app. So they will have to think about how they're going to put their information using their photos and their text inside this app. So it requires a higher order thinking skill. Analyze. So when we're analyzing, we're discovering, simplifying, differentiating, researching, experimenting, classifying, investigating, dissecting, and dividing. Here is where we have apps that take us on an exploration. I've got quite a few different science apps here, and there's some fantastic science apps that this one I think is about a frog dissection. So if you have a child who's on the spectrum who's real squirmy about touching a frog or doing anything like that, I mean, I'm not even on the spectrum and I would have trouble with that. So, you know, if you have a child that's struggling with dissecting a frog, you can use the app which simulates them being able to do that. Is it the same as the real thing? No, but it's providing that buffer. So they're not avoiding the task altogether. They're able to do it in a different way that would make sense to them. Evaluate. When we're evaluating, we're assessing, debating, validating, justifying, prioritizing, monitoring, critiquing, rating, and selecting. They get to work out what they're going to do with this particular app. For example, in Mindamo is a mind mapping app. So they would need to think about how they're going to sort and classify and work out the kinds of things that they're going to put inside their brainstorm activity, for example. This is a really cool app. This is called Decide Now. It's kind of like a spinning wheel, and it's for those kids that really struggle with making decisions in their learning. So let's say you have a writing activity. They struggle with what they're going to write about. So inside this app, you could have 10 different selections of a topic that they could write about. And they spin the wheel and it goes to that particular selection. So it takes the procrastination out of learning. Some of those kids don't know where to start and then don't start. So they sit with the pen and paper for, or with their iPad for a really long time. And before you know it, the lesson's gone and they haven't even written a word. So this kind of app can prompt them and move them forward and get them actually doing something. It provides them with some stimulus. So then we have create. So where we're creating, we're adapting, improving, changing, devising, constructing, producing, formulating, combining, and building. There's a whole range of apps here that can assist your students in this process. We have apps like a comic creative type app. This one is a comic creation app as well. A poetry creator. This is a fantastic app called Tiny Tap, and your students can create their own game. We have Audio Boo. Students can use this to create their own podcasts. iMovie. Students can create their own iMovies using photos and their own videos. I have used this with so many different kids and they just love it. Puppet Pals is creating a theatre using animated characters. Again, it's another app that they really, really like. I could go on. It's just fantastic range of apps that students can use that cover a whole range of curriculum areas. So that sums up Bloom's digital taxonomy. I hope it's given you some food for thought, because that's what I'm trying to do with these lecture series that I'm putting on YouTube, is to just give you some ways to think about how you can apply this in your classroom. And I think Bloom's taxonomy is a really important tool to use when we're thinking about students on the spectrum. Because with students on the spectrum, we need structure, and this gives us a little bit of structure from which to work from. But it also helps us to understand where students are. We have to remember that children who are on the spectrum do learn differently, and mostly we need to focus on different areas for them. Remembering is the easy part. These kids remember, they have the best memories ever. that I've ever seen in students that I've worked with. They can remember things from week to week, obscure things that you can't even imagine them remembering. That is the easy part, yet we continue to focus down here because we can't see them going anywhere else. That's a huge mistake. We need to evolve them through these processes. And I think by using some of our fantastic digital tools that I've showed you and that is in this presentation, that we can assist them in acquiring learning concepts according to Bloom's digital taxonomy. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. As I said, I will be providing some links within the presentation. You can click on them once you've watched the whole thing. You can go back and click on them easily. I will also put it in the information section for you as well. Thanks for sharing this with me. Have a great day.